So conditions were nothing like I'd normally expect to find in late November. When I got back to the river, it was running very, very low and clear, which made it ideal for spotting fish. But you do have to remember, if you can see them, then they can see you. And even the cows were taking a look, because it's still dry enough for them to be out in the field, which is almost unheard of, I think, certainly in the Sussex Weald. But this is undoubtedly my favourite type of fishing, sight fishing or stalking, call it what you will. But you do have to be very careful when chub are the quarry, because, as I say in all my chub videos, they have a tendency to be incredibly nervous fish. And there's a deep hole just underneath the stump on the corner of this swim, and I'd seen a few fish in there, and I cast a bait into the shallows in front of it to see if I could tempt one out, and sure enough, one made an appearance and picked up the hook bait, which was chorizo, because two reasons for using chorizo. One, as with most of my trips, it was very short notice and I didn't have any proper bait to hand, and secondly, I figured that, or after going through the cupboards, I figured that was probably the smelliest or oiliest bait I could lay my hands on, expecting to find the river in a coloured condition. But the chub seemed to find it quite agreeable, even in clear and low conditions. And this fish was a proper old warrior of a fish. Bit missing out of his dorsal fin and a bit tatty on his tail, and the sort of large deep bronze scales of an older chub. And there might be a few reasons for his tattiness that we shall see later, but having put him back, it was time to move on, because these narrow swims and streams, it does, once you've caught one, you tend to spook the others. But I took the opportunity to put a bit more bait in the hope that I could get them feeding again and come back to the swim later in the afternoon. And as I say, this is really my favourite style of fishing, and I'm sure everybody has their own way of spotting fish, but the way I do it is that rather than look for fish, I tend to focus on the riverbed or the lake bed, wherever I'm fishing, and focus my eyes on that. And then as you move along, you begin to see things in your peripheral vision that are higher up in the water, and inevitably they tend to be fish. And if you're moving upstream, obviously you'll see the fins first, which in chub are very dark, and if you're moving downstream, you'll see the white of their mouths. But occasionally you start to see other things as well, like this little chap. Now, I can't remember a time where mink weren't in the countryside. They are an invasive species. They're not native, and these are in fact, or this one is an American mink. And certainly in Sussex, I think the population started as escapees or liberated animals from mink farms back in the 70s and early 80s. But as I say, to the best of my, well, I can't remember a time where they weren't about. But something that I have noticed is over the years they seem to have got smaller, which I'm guessing is a slight adaptation to their environment, where they're not getting fed in farms and they're having to fend for themselves. I've got slightly mixed feelings. At various times there's been schemes to eradicate them, but I think it needs to be an all or nothing thing. Taking a few out I don't think really makes any difference. and they've been around so long that they are almost an integral part of the environment and the ecology of the river, and it's almost better to have a dominant animal with an established territory rather than a constant flow of new ones coming through. But opinions vary. But that might explain the tatty fins, or the bit of missing dorsal on the first chub that I caught there. I don't know. Now this is a little pool that always looks like it should produce fish and never does. But I always give it a go. At the tail end I often see a puff of silt, and I think there's maybe a small trout or some trout parr that hang out down there right in the shallows at the end, but I've never seen any chub there. But I keep trying, and I'm sure plenty of people will be cringing as they see me approach the river from such a high bank. In my defence, I am casting a shadow upstream and not where I'm intending to fish, and the spot that I'm looking to fish is actually a raft that's made up of driftwood, and it's created a sort of film and a foam on the water, so hopefully I don't stand out too much from under the water. But I do tend to walk upright. I know a lot of people, when they go stalking, they crawl along and they shuffle along on their bellies and stuff, and to me, you make more disturbance that way. You're putting yourself down closer to the water. It's harder to see over the bankside vegetation, and inevitably you make more disturbance. So I do always think that it's better to walk slowly but upright. And although I was planning on freelining, I do carry a selection of sticks and bits of bamboo that I can float rubber to the line. Now they're not buoyant enough to act as floats. They're more bite indicators or strike indicators, because anything more than a pinch of bread flake will cause them to sink, and I tend to fish them over depth. But they're especially good in this situation where you're fishing in foam, because you can set the bait over depth, and as that wafts underneath the raft, you can just watch it for twitches or if it disappears. But that little spot didn't produce, so it was on to the next one, and again another sort of scummy raft. And it's always worth checking these out, and if you're going to get action, it tends to come very quickly. And so was the case in this instance, as another fish came out and grabbed the chorizo. And it's always quite difficult playing fish in such confined spaces, not just playing the fish but netting them as well, because it is just an absolute jungle of snags, and you have to sort of thread the fish around everything to get them to the net. But after a spirited fight, this one was safely in the net, and I could see straight away it was a smaller fish, but that in itself is quite encouraging, because it shows that there's different year classes. As I've explained before, this is a lovely little fish actually, lovely and clean, but as I've said before, this whole valley floods, and I think that depending on the time of year, you can lose entire year classes of fish, which leaves large areas largely devoid of life. But with the light failing, it was back up to the first spot again, this little corner pool. And interestingly, I had recently just seen a thing from the late great Richard Walker describing chub fishing, and he proposed that if you spook chub, it takes a good 30 minutes per pound of their weight for them to regain enough confidence to start feeding again. And I think that's particularly apt on these small and shallow streams. As I say, most of the fishing here is one fish and move on, even if you know there's more fish in the swim, simply because you're playing fish over the rest of the shoal, and everything spooks the instant that you hook a fish. But having introduced that free bait and left it for an hour or so, I thought it was worth popping back and trying, because I definitely know that there's more fish in this corner. But try as I might, it was very much a race against daylight and well, nighttime really, and nighttime won. But I vowed there and then to return the following day. But of course, it's never good to make too many plans in this country in November, because overnight it poured with rain, and then it was followed by a couple of hard frosts, and then the frosts melted. But at the very first opportunity I was back down there, and you can see the river's running much higher. This is the corner swim, but the colour is starting to drop out, and it was a sort of last gasp thing, last 45 minutes of light or so. But I don't mind fishing like that in this environment, because you know that one fish is all you're going to get in general times, and so if you've got time to land one fish, it's worth giving it a go. And I was sticking with the chorizo, and it probably was better suited to these conditions. Slight colour and a bit more depth. And again I had my little stick on the line, and first cast it was taken, and this fish was pulling hard and was doing its utmost to get back to the hole underneath the roots. It's certainly a nice bit of fishing. Made the trip worthwhile, but gradually I was able to get it back upstream and level with the net and scoop it in. And this fish was slightly different again. The first fish was an old fish, the second fish was a pristine young but smaller fish, and then this one was probably the best of the lot, because it was a young looking fish, but a very solid example, real width to its back and proper depth to its body. And I don't bring scales for these short trips, but it was a really nice fish, and it's really encouraging that a high percentage of the population in this stretch at the minute are gaining weight really well and looking really healthy, which is really encouraging, because certainly in the past, as I've said, there's been lots of fish lots of small fish or no fish, and now we've got a nice population of growing fish. But that was enough for today. Until next time.